Welcome back to Writing Bastards. This is Neil, and I'm here with Drake.
How's it going?
We're going to talk about characters in fantasy. We tried to talk about it when we had our discussion of Gladiator 1 verse 2 and ended up just talking about the movie. So we have to do another episode and really get into writing characters that we like. The first question is just what are some of your favorite characters in fantasy that come to mind? Can be recent characters you've either seen or read, who they are, what makes them good. You can start,
Yeah, recent characters. I
or
think
just ones that come to mind too. That's fine.
come to the mind. Okay, I can give you like we talked about this a little bit, but I think one of my favorite characters is still it's the Last Kingdom. It's Uhtred. I think through the series he grows a lot in his own way as like a leader and as a person. That's why I liked him a ton. Is because he's very flawed. The very first couple episodes, he's dumb. He does a lot of stupid stuff, but I think it's very fitting. I mean, he's supposed to be maybe at that time 17, 18, 19 years old. His whole family gets killed. I think he's very real in that sense. But on top of that, as the show progresses, he fits more and more into the shoes of a leader. He takes on more responsibility. He becomes more mature. And I really liked that because it wasn't a fast growth either. It was growth through lots of lessons and life problems that he deals with. So I think to me, and there's the book series that, I think there's 12 books in it. So I'm sure it's even more fleshed out in that. But he was one of my favorite characters that I've recently run into. But I don't know. How about you? What has been your recent favorite character?
I guess I'm cheating because this isn't super recent, but this is a
It's
character I
okay.
keep coming
Cheating's good.
back to, and it's one of my favorite villains in fantasy, maybe TV in general. And it's Tyrion Lannister. Or sorry,
Ah,
no, sorry, not Tyrion, Tywin,
oh,
Tywin.
Tywin,
The old
Tywin.
guy, the grandpa
Yes.
dude. Um,
Yes.
I don't know how I mix that up with Tyrion, but Tywin, the old
A
guy,
little bit
and
different.
it's the first scene that you
Hmm.
encounter him. It's like him like skinning the like thing that they hunted, like the deer, the elk, or whatever it was.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it just he's like talking as he's like working with the knife, and it just gives you this sense of this guy is brutal and
Yeah.
matter of fact and competent. And what's hard with villains is I feel like a lot of villains are either sort of unknowable in fantasy, like they're
Mm.
this unexplained, like mysterious thing, and that's kind of like the Night King is in Game of Thrones. That's kind of how Sauron is,
Hmm.
right? Like you can get backstory about them if you want, but there's not a lot, and they don't do a lot in
Hmm.
the story. Like you don't get to see a lot
True.
about them. Um, and
Yeah.
so that's why I like Tywin because he's a very involved character. He's super competent, and you're
Hmm.
afraid of him because he is competent and ruthless.
Hmm.
Um, so I just love it. I think he's an amazing character. Um, or the other genre you might get occasionally are like the Joker type of bad people, where and
Mm.
those are good, right?
Yeah.
But that's more of like watch the world burn. They're
Hmm.
very like chaotic evil, but like a highly competent like lawful evil character that is
Yes.
actually shown a lot is hard to find, and I think he just is so good.
I was gonna say, I feel like the only other character a villain is Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes, and even that for a villain, because he's a very high, it's a very competent villain. He has his motives and reasons, but even throughout the book, I think an added layer that adds to that character is that you don't know if he's real or not, because sometimes there's clues that he exists, but sometimes it almost makes it seem like Sherlock Holmes is imagining him to have like an adversary because he's such a hyper intelligent person. So there's lots of fan theories. I've read tons of theories, but no, I'd agree. There's very few fleshed out villains that are understandable. I mean, I think you listed a good couple. I think another you could add to that is Voldemort. Even with his backstory, I'm never really compelled to understand why I don't really understand why he's so evil. He just hates the people that are half wizards, but there's not like I think, and I am not a super junkie of the series, so I don't remember all the Harry Potter stuff. But it just is his mom. Like I think his mom was even, and this might be from the movies, is half wizard too. And so I just he's a cool design in the movie. He looks like the epitome of evil, but I don't really get why he's evil. It's same with Sauron, really evil looking. Even I don't know if it's the Lich King. You're gonna have to correct me on this. I'm not as familiar with Lord of the Rings, but like they're all super evil looking and super sick looking too. I mean, these the ring race, all of them, but they're just unexplained evil. So I would agree. Tywin from that series I like because he's very fleshed out, very fleshed out, very. I like evil and competent villains. I enjoy them a lot.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think other people also have said the same thing
Hmm.
about Voldemort. I think Brandon
Yeah.
Sanderson recently had an episode where he was talking about it, actually. He
Oh,
doesn't
did
think
he?
doesn't think he doesn't think Voldemort after like early Voldemort, I think he likes, thinks is a
Hmm.
little more interesting, but basically later on he becomes more one-dimensional. Um,
Okay, so maybe like the
so
first couple books or movies, but then moves
but
on. Okay.
yeah, but I mean, I agree. I
Hmm.
think it's not as compelling. And again, you don't see him much,
Hmm. Yeah,
right?
he's
Like
not
you don't
present very often.
interact with him as a character. So that's why I like Tywin because he's
Hmm.
like central to the plot for several seasons. So
Yeah.
um,
Well, they almost
yeah,
remind me like the stereotypical villain of like some evil CEO of a company, but a really lazy CEO of a company who just kind of makes all of his underlings and thralls do his labor and he just kind of kicks it and then he shows up once in a while. And I don't know. I just have a hard time with that because especially leadership. I think leadership, you can have a villain, but I think villains need to have leadership. But Voldemort is just intimidation. Like he just no one, and I think that's the thing is he just like if people betray him, I feel like the worst thing that's gonna happen is they're gonna just kill the other person, right? Like if I was under his tutelage or his disciple or whatever you want to call him, like I'm like the worst thing that he's gonna do is just kill me. Like, but Tywin, I don't know. That dude might not kill me. He just might make my life a living hell and torture me, and I just like have this slow, drawn out suffering. Like you know what I'm saying? Like a very I enjoy that where the fear of the character isn't that he's just gonna kill you, that he's so capable, he will be very creative about what will happen to you. Sort of a villain.
yeah, I think it moves the plot along when you
Hmm.
have a compelling villain because you're worried about how they're going to solve the problems that the villain creates.
Yep.
Um, Whereas when it's more of just like a generic villain, it's harder. But
Yeah, I agree.
do you have another character you want to talk about? Should we do another
Me.
round, or if not, that's fine too.
Do you have one?
The other one I was thinking of is the Malazan Book of the Fallen books. They have this race. I don't know if I'm going to say it right, like Talon and Mass, and they're these super interesting. They're kind of like undead skeletons
Hmm.
who were like prehistoric hunters. I'm not going to give much away, but you'll encounter them.
Yeah, I haven't even
And
read it yet, but I want to read them.
some of the characters from that race are super interesting,
Okay.
and they're good characters because the world building of who they are is super cool. Like
Hmm.
they're kind of like emotionless and have lived
Oh.
for a really long time, and so their perspective
Hmm.
on the world is so much different.
Oh,
And
nice.
even their dialogue is just a delight. Like it's just hilarious to read the dialogue. Um, so I feel like a lot of shows, like on
Hmm.
like film and TV, they have these like sort of gimmicky characters that are different and talk funny, and people don't like them. They see them maybe as more of a gimmick. Like I'm kind of thinking
Hmm.
of like a C3PO or like a Jar Jar Binks, you know?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
you could maybe apply that to these characters, but in book form, they're just so fleshed out and
Hmm.
it's so different. It just stands out among most characters that I've ever read. And that's just because Steven Erickson's world building is super good. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm excited
And
for you to read those.
yeah, I'm super excited to read them. Before we started the podcast, we were talking about it, and I was telling Neil that I was like, I read like the first, I don't even think it's the first chapter. I think it's the prologue. The prologue. I read that just thinking, this is so good. I mean, the dialogue, there's not too much, but there's not too little. It's just that right mixture of what I want, where it's not an info dump, but I'm getting information, and yet something is going on behind the scenes that I'm not aware of that's been keeping me hooked and interested. And then the thing is, right after that, chapter one is just totally not about those people. Like I'm some in some books you get a prologue and then chapter one, and it's still that character. It's kind of like a prologue is almost their chapter one in a sense. And it's just some. It just switches to this old lady and this fishing girl, not a fish girl, fishing girl. She's not a fish, but and I was just like, wow. I can just tell just from that alone that he had this world really fleshed out. So I think really fleshed out villains, characters come from good world building. I think maybe that's the trick. But yeah, I'm so excited. I really want to read him. So yeah, no.
Yeah, let's we have a couple other things we wanted to go over. I think the next is fan casting characters. So,
Yes.
using inspiration of a character in order to make your own. Should you do it? To what extent? What are the pros
Mm,
and cons?
yeah. Do you want me to go first? You want to go first?
You can go for it.
Me? Okay. Um, yeah, just let me organize my thoughts. Yeah, I think fan casting, there's pros and cons to it. I've listened to some authors that don't fan cast. I've listened to some authors that do, and then there's obviously the ones that kind of do a mixture of light fan casting. So I'll try and make my opinion or ideas as concise as possible with it. But I think for beginner writers, it's very helpful to fan cast because half the stuff you're gonna like when I was 12, it was very helpful just to start writing. I pretty much like copied a lot of movies and I pretty much just rewrote the movie with minor changes. It's basically just a fan fiction, right? But it was very helpful for me to almost focus so much more on just writing a story and kind of just trying to get the words and the practice down. So I think in that regard, total fan casting is fine because if it helps you kind of get the creativity flowing, right? But as your writing matures, I think going away from it is better because you obviously don't want copyright and you don't want to just write the same story. But with that being said, I think some people, for me especially, I can draw, but I cannot draw like these fantastical works of art that some people can. And so it's sometimes almost hard for me to visualize the world I'm trying to write. And so sometimes I think fan casting is very helpful. Um, I can't say I don't do it because in my book that I'm just editing right now, that I'm going to be putting out hopefully in a few months from now, one of the characters, I was having a really hard time figuring out what I wanted him to look like. Really hard time. Like, I kid you not. I was like, because I had his backstory, I had what he was, I had all of his name, everything, but I just couldn't find anyone that I couldn't really envision him. It was kind of like he had this body and no head in my like imagination. I was like, we can't just be the headless dude. Like that doesn't fit the world building. And it was actually I was watching a movie on Netflix. It's called The King with like Timothy Chalamet. Do you know what movie I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what's his name? Robert Pattinson. Dude, his character literally came on screen, and I was like, that, that is what I've been looking for. I don't know. It was just like this long blonde hair, and that was really that all that I put in the book is I'm like, okay, I know he's not gonna be like look exactly like him in my head anymore, but that's kind of like the inspiration that I needed to like go. So like in the book, yeah, the character has really long blonde hair like he did in that movie. If they ever made a movie of this book, I would highly suggest putting him in it just because it's like it just fits so well. But I do try and go away from it because I definitely the characters I tried to make them different in a sense because once again I don't want to just be stealing characters and using their exact who they are. But it helped me I think get over that hurdle. So in that regard, I think fan casting can be very useful. Um, Kind of giving you like a base foundation to build upon because sometimes it is hard. I mean, especially if you have a very wide cast of characters, trying to make all of them different is very hard because it's you are the author. There's one of you, and you're trying to make people that are all different. I almost have this theory that if you have multiple personality disorder, you're probably going to be one of the best authors in the world because you can write very unique, genuine characters. Because even Brandon Sanderson in his books, if you read enough of them, you start noticing similarities because it's one person. If you had like a group of authors writing one book, you'd probably get really good characters. So, no, I think fan casting is helpful on the foundation and then building from that. And then, like I said, for beginner writers, just to get you going, so will write and start writing, I think it's very helpful. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on fan casting?
I think that's an interesting point about fan fiction, and I think it's true. Like you should just get reps in writing, and so
Hmm.
if fan fiction is an easy way to do that and avoid getting stuck world building for years and not actually writing anything, then that totally makes sense. Um, and writing about interesting characters, or at least writing about a universe that already exists, even, and you're
Hmm.
just kind of putting your own characters in there that are sort of inspired by that universe.
Hmm.
Like even that is just like great practice. So I agree.
Yeah.
Um, and
Okay.
I also think, uh, obviously, your inspiration has to come from somewhere, and it's not a bad thing to be inspired by a certain piece of work and to write something that's tangential to it.
Hmm.
Like I'll go read the same type of books, over and over again, and that's like kind of how it works. Actually, that's like a good thing in
Hmm.
most cases. To like signal to readers that this is a type of book that you would enjoy and has some things that might be familiar to you.
Hmm.
And in that same sense, like it's good to have like some tropes in your stories that are things people are familiar with. It's like
Hmm.
if you're gonna write like a fantasy book, um, you probably shouldn't put the same level of graphic detail and volume of like, you know, romance content in there. Like
Yeah.
there should be
Uh-huh.
some, but it's like it shouldn't be like, if you want it to be romantasy, you can, but like that's sort of
Hmm.
like its own thing.
Yeah.
Or, if it's a fantasy book, like you don't want to have like spaceships come flying in out of nowhere and then it turns into like some sci-fi tech. It's like that really is like different, right? But
Hmm.
it's not what people are going to expect. So in that
Would
sense, I
agree.
agree. Yeah, it's also good to be inspired by characters that you think are cool and do your own twist on them. And like we've discussed in general, like a lot of stories have already been told, and so you don't have to like tell a completely novel story. Like,
Hmm.
it's just a new take on it. But yeah,
Yeah.
obviously, if it's too similar, then people will call you out and like it'll be weird and look uninspiring.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I think. Moving on, pros and cons of first and third person narratives.
Mm.
Um,
Yes.
Maybe I'll start.
Okay.
I think there's been obviously good books written with both.
Hmm.
Um, I think stylistically, I just like third person more,
Hmm.
and that's probably like the most common. I think most books
I
skew
was gonna
towards
say I think
that.
most are third person. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also do gravitate towards these like Malazan Book of the Fallen type series where it's a lot
Hmm.
of characters, multiple storylines,
Yeah.
different things going on. Like I want to jump around a little bit. I don't need it to be really focused on
Linear.
one person the whole time. So that's why
That
I'm
makes
kind of
sense.
like I don't. care for it um, from like a reader perspective, but it
Hmm.
also doesn't break the experience if there's a good book
Yeah.
like and it's for a person, I'll still read it. Um, but I guess I think that's sort of the pro of third person is just that's at least in like epic fantasy generally what you see, and so
Hmm.
most people are going to be used to it, and um, it's easier to capture like a lot of perspectives
Yeah.
from various characters, which gives you that like expansive epic fantasy story that
Hmm.
people want. So I think it kind of makes sense to do third person generally, but depending on your genre and what you want to do, I could see that being different. But I mostly write fantasy, so
Yeah, no. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. No, I can see that. Especially with epics, I think the one thing I dislike the most is epic fantasy in first person with multiple viewpoints. It drives me nuts. Um, I mean, I brought this up in the first podcast, but Red Rising, at book four, it starts doing this, and I don't hate it, but I definitely didn't. I'm hesitant to say I don't love it because I haven't finished all of it yet, but I'm just I just enjoyed the one character, and I enjoyed how he told the story because it was other characters were doing stuff, and you still got building like character development and building with him, but it was through his eyes. And the cool thing that he did with that is sometimes he built them incorrectly because this character that you're seeing it through perceived it a little differently than it really was, which is what's going to happen to every human, right? I mean, and so I like that aspect of it because later on in the series, you're like, oh, so he was just like, oh, so that guy's actually a decent guy, but you were just being like a hormonal teenager. You just thought he was a dirtbag. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I think that was a cool experience. But I agree with you. With epic fantasy, third person is probably the best if because you're gonna have lots of characters. Um, I have yet to read an epic fantasy with the first person that does it really well. I don't think there is. I don't think I cannot think of a like a book that is 1,000 pages of epic fantasy from the same viewpoint. Like that's like a whole series length almost for first person. Um, Whoever does it though, if they do it well, they're going to be super successful because they'll be the only person to have done it. So more power to whoever gets this figured out. But yeah, I think for epics it is. You have to have, I think, with first person, a very fleshed out character that is extremely interesting. Very interesting. It's either that or the main character is kind of a bit useless and experiences the world. And so you're almost like it's first person to almost just transport you. Because I've read some books like this where the main character is pointless. They do nothing. They basically just kind of run around and hit stuff with a stick, is what it feels like. But the one thing it did really well was it put me in the shoes of the character. So it didn't even really feel like I was a character. I feel like I was there. And so it was cool because everyone else was really fleshed out and had all this stuff going on. And you're like, oh, oh. So it was really immersive for that quality. But yeah, the character, I can't remember what the book was called. I have to like look this up and remember. But the character was not anything special. So I think that's like the pros and cons of first, it's hard. Pro is it's very immersive. Con is the character that's main character can be very poorly fleshed out sometimes. Um, Another con is epic fantasy. I don't know how you're going to make it work, so figure out how to make it work. Maybe that will be the next adventure someone tries. But yeah, I think third person generally works well because then the narrator becomes objective and they can just say flat out, this guy is this and she does this. I think the only thing you can't do though with third person is having an unreliable narrator in third person is really annoying. Because in first person I understand because it's a character telling it to me or I'm experiencing it with the character. So him being
mhm.
unreliable, I think makes more sense, right? That's like if you and I were telling a story to each other, we're gonna like we could have the same experience happen, and then you and I are gonna tell it differently, right? But in third person, it's like we have someone watching us who then has to tell what happened to us. So you can't be saying, you can't. It's annoying to have a lying narrator like that because then you
That's
just.
pretty uncommon, right? Like
I
I
haven't
don't know if
read
I've
one yet.
read,
I don't
yeah.
think I've encountered one, but I just off the top of my head, I think that would be the only problem with third is do not try unreliable narrator with third because they'll just piss everybody off that this guy is just lying.
Yeah. I think what happens in third person too that can be bad when they have just a narrator in general
Hmm.
is most people sort of accept that, you like show, you don't tell, you explore important points through dialogue, not exposition.
Yes.
Um, and so it's easier, I think, in third person to just do straight up like exposition.
Yep.
Whereas first person, usually it would maybe be more monologue, which is also probably worse than doing dialogue. Right?
Yeah.
Like you don't want to read like infinite monologue either, but
No.
it can be better than just a straight up narration too. So
Yeah. I
I think
think,
that's like the other thing.
yeah, with first person, I think the best way to do important building is through dialogue. I think that's the only way really to do it because the monologue, even some of the Red Rising that I really like, sometimes it gets a little old. It almost gets a little whiny sounding sometimes. Then again, this he's way more successful than me, so I can't complain. It worked for him, so I'm not gonna knock it too hard. But sometimes it almost gets a little whiny when you hear inner monologue so much. Like, oh my gosh, is this main character complaining again? Like, oh my gosh, like just and I don't think that much in my head. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, dude, this guy's got a lot going on. He's in the middle of a battle and he's got this three, like, this doesn't happen in this series, but I've read some first person where it's like, I'm getting shot at by arrows. I take cover. I look at the dirt and remember my family and think about my family being killed and slaughtered in the mine. Like, dude, no one's gonna think about that in battle. Like, I sure know I wouldn't. I'd be more concerned about getting like killed, you know? So if it's a fitting monologue, maybe it would work. Like, oh, I'm so worried I'm gonna die. I'm scared. I'm trying not to pee my pants. No, oh no, like here comes another arrow. Maybe that would work, but I don't know. I agree with you on that. Monologues can get annoying.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up with writing good characters.
Okay.
So I kind of want to hear from you what you think the best character you wrote so far is, and how'd you do it?
The main character in this series that I'm starting, I feel like is one of the better I've written because I've planned his character arc out and my math might be right, it might be wrong, but it's gonna at least it'd be like around book 3 to book 5 is when it gets done because they're not long books. I don't like writing overly long fantasy. I like short fantasy, but short fantasy that has high readability so I can reread it over and over and can learn new things. That's my attempt with this. But I like it because I don't fully explain him in the first book. I don't explain a lot in the first book. And maybe this is going to sink my book, but but that's my big thing is I want it to be very drip fed and very real. And I think writing a good character, it took me a lot of just thinking about where I wanted the story to go and how he interacts with the world building. Um, but also, I think another thing is in this book I'm writing, I have the other character I think is very good that I've written because there's a lot of complexity to what they're going through. They both because one is an infant. He doesn't remember anything. The second is someone who's experienced a lot, but tries not to show it and tries to portray something that maybe they aren't exactly.
Yeah,
And
give me like an overview of like who they are and then like how you designed them, just so you
I,
can understand.
An overview.
Like
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'm like
yeah, like
rambling bad, aren't
who
I?
these characters are
Yeah.
and how you made them good. Why you think they're good.
So, okay, I'll just do the main character, and that'll be the easiest way. So, why I think the main character is good because first off, um, the main character starts off not knowing anything in what's going on. He has his memory is lost. He doesn't know why his memory is lost. Wakes up on a battlefield, and he has to explore and figure out what's going on. And as he does, it's it's really hard. It's been a hard book to write, and I'm worried I didn't do it well because it's almost he's an infant, right? So how would he go throughout this and learn, you know? And throughout the series and the people he interacts with, you see him pick up traits from every person, which happens, I feel like, in real life. As we explore life, we pick up things here and there. I think that's a big thing that helped me design him is seeing how actual people interact in the world. Because if I spend enough time around you, I will pick up your habits. And that's something I really wanted to do in this book is have the character from the beginning to even the end of this book have a very big change. And I also added that I helped make this character better was I like the loss of memory because now he can be an unreliable narrator after I just dogged this. He is unreliable not because he's trying to lie to the people, but because he doesn't remember. And that plays a huge role throughout the book of this memory and looking for this memory and what is memory? Why is memory so important? It's a big theme. I think that was what helped me is his character theme too. Is he almost has a theme of memory and resurrection is kind of like his two themes I did. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with like the liturgical cycle of Catholic religion, but that had a huge impact on this book. I'm not
Yeah,
Catholic,
can you
so I
explain
hope the
that in
Catholic
a
community doesn't hate me for writing this book. But it had a huge influence because I actually never knew this. I learned a lot about the Catholic religion writing this book, and I because I think what I wanted to do is I wanted obviously in this book a religion that kind of people could have some familiarity with, but the
mm,
world that takes place in is a fallen world. It's the shell of world. It's fallen apart. It's in scraps. It's in pieces. So but I wanted something relatable, and I think a lot of fantasy kind of picks medieval religion, which to me is probably Catholic. So I just went there. But the liturgical cycle is actually, and I'm not
what
Catholic,
is that? Because I
so
don't know what that is.
so yeah, me neither as of a few weeks ago. But it's the cycle of, and once again, I'm not Catholic, so don't dog me if this is wrong. But so there's cycles in the seasons where they have, I believe, ceremonies. I'm gonna pull my phone out so I can tell you exactly what they are, and kind of religious worship. And that had a big impact because that really became the tone of each of the books I want to do. Okay, so here you go. So looking this up, we have like, so this is what it looks like. You're not going to see very well, but that's oh yeah, it's way washed out.
Like a okay.
So
And
that's what it
how does
is.
this relate to the character again?
Because the characters all have a they're a symbol of something in the, it's like I kind of pulled from the Catholic religion, but like I said, the first character, his theme is resurrection. And one of the
Mm,
liturgical cycles, according to this diagram, has resurrection in it. And so you learn there's a lot of backstory with that because he wakes up on the battlefield, but why doesn't he have a memory? So you start learning that his theme is and then the character that he follows around, she also has. I'm trying to think of like her themes that I put with her. Hers would probably be like duty, and duty's like the main one of that character, but also kind of like forgiveness because in this first novel they both kind of explore those themes. Um, yeah, I think my work in this I did a lot of really good characters because even the names, that main character, her name in the language I chose meant like strong, and like not brave, it was like strong and something else. But it's also in that language a word for a tree, and there's a lot of and so
That's cool.
but she connects with the tree. Yeah, there's I think I like what I did with these characters. I just put a lot of detail into them, but then throughout the book, do little hints here and there and try and expand it because even the book itself is a theme. Like I said, the name was the Tenebrae. Tenebrae is a Catholic celebration where they extinguish candles, and so it's kind of like this book is the opening book because the book ends the same way they end Tenebrae with like a loud noise called the Strepitus. In my book, literally the last thing that happens is the massive like noise thing. So it's kind of me telling the reader this is like because then after that in Tenebrae in the Catholic religion they go on to like the 3 days of darkness before Christ resurrected. That is where my book series begins. Is like it's gonna get worse from here before it gets better. So
Yeah.
I think to
That
sum it up is themes. I think thematic characters help me build them really well, to answer your question.
well, it sounds like I mean, you did world building and the characters are very grounded in the world building. So it's good foundation. And then the main guy's motivation of recovering memory is a very clear thing for him to do, which is
Hmm.
fun to follow, I think.
Yeah.
So that'll be exciting. And like I've heard it articulated that what makes characters interesting partially is they have to have some sort of motivation that's interesting that you care about,
Hmm.
and they have to want to get somewhere, and there needs to be a gap. Like where
Hmm.
they're at right now is not where they want to be, and so like the story's kind of about getting there. So that's a really clear way of doing it. I think that's
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, same.
Um,
And there's lots of big twists in the book. I mean, by the fifth book or the third book, whatever it will be, you learn a huge spoiler about the main character that people might destroy the book over that I
all
already have
right,
figured out. So we'll find out. We'll
that's
find out.
exciting. That's
So we'll see if I
exciting.
pull it off well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway, what about you? What for your characters? What's the best one you've built, and how did you build it? Go give a more articulate answer
I'll
than I can give.
yeah, we can wrap it up here. Maybe it's the last thing we talk about. My recent book that I wrote, universally from beta readers, I got feedback that this immortal skeleton character was their favorite, was the most interesting. And that character is inspired by other things that I've read.
Okay.
Um, but basically, I think he's a good, one of the good main characters because his motivations are pretty clear, like who he is. He's very consistent throughout the book. He doesn't like do things that are super against what you would expect his character to do.
Hmm.
Um, and he's funny. So he's
I did
likable,
like him. I liked him a lot.
right? Like
He was
you
a good one.
having a likable character is good, and easy way to do that is try and make him funny. He's kind of unique, kind of weird, kind of
Hmm.
different. So that's just fun. I mean, it just makes it less generic.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think writing good characters is probably like one of the most important things to do.
Hmm.
And uh, some of my books, not all the characters are as good as the others. And that's my main focus with writing my next one that I'm going to write is
Hmm.
try super hard to make sure the motivations are down. The characters, who they are, is really consistent. So when you're writing, it's good the whole way through. And I think that requires planning in the beginning. Like just
Hmm.
take a whole page and write about who that character is. Like let that character like speak to you for a page and just info dump.
I like
Um,
that.
and then that way, like the plot is not molding your characters. It's more like, they are actually sort of their own thing and they
Hmm.
interact with the world and the plot in a way that makes sense for their characters. You're not just shoehorning them to move the plot forward. So
That makes sense.
that's my focus. We'll see how it goes. But
No, that's a good,
uh,
a real quick question. Have you ever seen the character sheets that you can fill in, and have you ever used one where it's like their
like D and
favorite
D.
food, their favorite tea? Well, like I actually, there's a writer, he gives these out, and it's like you can print them. It's
Oh,
like your character name. their age, their eye color, hair color, their favorite food, their favorite location. I'm like, I don't even think I could answer all these for myself. Like,
It's a
I
good
don't know if
point.
I don't know if you ever
I
used
haven't
one of
done it.
those because I've
I
never
haven't
used
done
one
it.
a ton either.
Every character for this next one, I'm getting more and more into sort of planning before I start writing. But
Same.
every character will have their own sheet and just be like tons of info on them.
That'll be
Um,
sweet.
so yeah, I'm trying to create a list of all the key things that they must have. Like Brandon Sanderson does a good job in his lectures of like, how are you going to make them likable? Like, how are you going to make their motivations? Like, what
Yeah,
is their
that's good.
progression? Yeah, like how competent are they going to be? Like, he kind of maps out like some of those things you should think through, but there's so much more,
Hmm.
right? Like all this backstory, little
Hmm.
details about them. They're probably less important, but it's sort of like the cherry on top. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, the best fleshed out characters though, probably just all the anime manga characters, let's be real.
that's so true. Oh my gosh.
So fleshed out. That's a whole video in itself though, but
Dude, we should do that because I have so much to say. Oh
yeah, me
man.
too. Yeah, I should, yeah. What have I done?
Oh man. Yeah.
Gosh. Uh,
They have got it down to a science.
really, they
Um,
do. It's so true.
well, anyway, I'm excited to read your book that you
I'm
just
excited
read.
to get it done.
So I'm stoked for that, and we'll let all of the listeners and watchers know when that happens.
Yeah, hopefully soon. I'm doing
Yeah.
my Crunch December where I've got the artist for the cover art talked to, just editing it as fast as I can. Then it's going to beta reader. So hopefully, if life loves me and goes according to plan, latest I will put it on Amazon or Kindle Unlimited would be February, the very start, unless publishers take it. So somewhere in there.
I guess my book will probably be even sooner here too. So
Leave me alone. I'm trying to catch up to you. I
we
got
can
two I'm
both
trying to push in a year, man.
we'll probably talk about mine first, and then soon
Uh,
after we'll talk
oh,
about yours.
please.
Probably
Fingers
December
crossed.
sometime. I'll release it.
Oh, don't tell
But,
me that. I'm excited. I'm excited. That'll be fun.
but all
But
right, we'll see
okay,
y'all
well,
next time.
see you guys.